We are going to discuss today with GIdel the new estimates for the USDA report for the November report and also the week in the markets for commodities right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So Jerry, how are you today? We end up with corn going higher this week, but soybeans going down. But so many things happen during the week, right?
Oh, what a wild weekend after we last talked. The the next day, all of a sudden there was a drone attack on some the the Russian fleet down in Crimea, and all of a sudden we were basically the Russians said they weren't sure they were in the food corridor agreement. From there, the actual damage seems to be, I guess, limited at this point. Maybe one ship got hurt, and then supposedly all seven or eight, nine drones were shot down. But anyway, the market definitely suspected and anticipated the fact that the current food corridor situation, which is now going to be still negotiated up through the 19th of November, was out. But later in the week, the Moscow decided that they had only suspended their participation and that they had come to agreement with Turkey and Ukraine about, uh, excuse me, with Turkey and the UN about being back involved in it. I'm not sure exactly how that happened. Supposedly Ukraine didn't offer any particular different concessions, and they sure didn't say that they had sent any drones over there to the Russian fleet. But by midweek, they were back in the involvement in this particular program. And so after a very sharp rally early in the weekend, over the weekend, in the first couple of days, prices kind of settled back. Except, interestingly enough, the soybean market. I think we're in somewhat of a post-harvest mentality there with the U.S. Harvest progress over 80%.
Yes, and we are headed up now for a new estimate for production in the world from the United States Department of Agriculture.
Yes, yeah, well, that's definitely a big factor out ahead of us here. It's going to be next Wednesday after the U.S. elections. It's going to be an interesting, also political situations going on, and also in the U.S. and around the world, because we did end up having a, a significant change in the Brazilian uh, government there when Ballesteros lost back to previous premier uh, Lulu. I'm sorry I don't pronounce his last name very well, but that definitely has its issues. That's part of the reason why I think the soybeans were stronger here this last week because of the truckers that had blockaded quite a few of the significant highways, either going to Santos or to Rondopoulos or even north on 163 toward the Amazon. And that because of the fact that if uh, that's the significant portion of the Brazilian government's revenue is exports and the taxes off of that. And so that definitely caused things. So interestingly enough, which is a positive for the Ballesteros government, they have encouraged the truckers to disperse and at this point, at least, look like there's going to be a peaceful transition on January 1st to the next elected official in Brazil, which is a very positive type of scenario, at least so far. Yeah, there's still a long ways between now and January 1st, but I think that's a big factor out there that also helped the soybeans and the political world situation here. Definitely still also a very, very important part of agricultural prices as we go forward here in the balance of 2022.
Yes, and checking the analyst estimates, what's most striking for you? There isn't a huge change in there.
I think you're exactly right. The striking change happens to be there's no change. And to some extent, that's I come with that same kind of attitude. I didn't have a big adjustment in my expectations on the U.S. corn and soybean yields because the fact that we'd already made some significantly lower numbers here, and to some extent we were getting in an interesting world statistics in that you get so far to one side of the kind of channel of ideas out there, it's hard to anticipate there's going to be a big further adjustment. At this point, the Reuters estimates they left their U.S. Soybeans and corn yields exactly unchanged. So there's enough people within there, say 20 people or 25 people, that they have surveyed that expect just as many people slightly up and the other slightly down. So interestingly enough, I'm kind of still anticipating maybe that U.S. corn number could go down to 171 from the USDA's 171.9 last month. And that and soybeans to slip down 1/10 of a bushel down to 49.8 versus 49.9 last month. And so, but that's really a minor situation when it gets down to it. From there, the real reason on some of this is I still feel like that some of the Western plains, Western Corn Belt, Western Plains states like Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, maybe some even parts of Iowa, and that the dryness really continued to impact their yields. Well, there is indications maybe that some of the eastern states, eastern Corn Belt states, Indiana and Ohio, maybe Michigan, that come out a little bit better. The USDA really had already jumped up Illinois yields up to 210 last million, 210 bushels average. So I don't think there's a lot of change there. But the interesting twist also that came about here in some of the reports is that a uh, interestingly enough, a thing, a disease called vomitoxin, started to be showing up in some of the samples in Indiana and Ohio because of some of the wet conditions, or at least moisture conditions we had. And it's also a humidity issue too that impacted some of the crop. The twist of that is that vomitoxin is really a wheat disease in the spring. So it's kind of a twist of that showing up in the corn. So I don't know how much impact that'll have, but it did pop up in some of the news wires here this last few days from there. So yeah, from the standpoint of production, we're not anticipating a lot of change here. It doesn't look like in next week's USDA crop report, but
But as the days go over, I think more and more we'll have attention to the planting progress in Brazil, right?
oh, that's definitely a big factor. All right, uh, we're moving along there. The We're up in the north. We're up approaching 80% there in Mato Grosso. Now we're still not some of the excuse me, the further north areas out there. They're still not that far along. I think nationwide we're uh, in the 50s and 60% done. And that the interesting twist on this whole scenario on South America, or excuse me, on Brazilian plantings on soybeans is really what the impact will be, is this dryness that's currently in Argentina. Last year, it continued to march north and had a significant impact on the plantings and impacts of corn and soybeans in the Paraná, Rio Grande do Sul, and that area, plus Paraguay. And so that's going to be needed to be watched. Right now, some people are anticipating La Nina to back out of here in the next before the end of the year, and other people say it's going into January and February of next year. If it does that, that's important along the way from the standpoint of Brazil's potential crop, because that's what limited the production numbers, because it turns out later in the season the Brazilian bean output was very significantly strong in Mato Grosso last year to compensate for some of that lost bushels that occurred in the southern states there. Because right now, even if in Rio Grande do Sul, there's some areas there that are on the dry side, and getting some warning signs on that going forward.
All right, is there something else would you like to add?
Well, I think the one thing too we also have to keep in mind is that when we get to next Wednesday's report, the supply demand portion of the thing is also going to have an impact. We've really had a very slow world demand, or excuse me, world demand for U.S. corn, primarily because the Chinese have decided that they're trying to get arrangements worked out to import corn from Brazil. But I wonder, the import capability of corn from Brazil is quite a ways away. We're talking about significantly the big chunk of export corn is really not going to come until next summer. And that, so there's a long time in between here if they need some supplies. And that's the reason why we're less than 50% of our export sales this year, because the Chinese were a big buyer a year ago, even actually in the last summer, buying corn in the U.S. Now they haven't been a big buyer, and it's kind of surprising that some of the other areas. And we also, by the way, we did have an important factor come up with one of our main buyers right across the Rio Grande here with Mexico. We've had this kind of uneasy feeling of the Mexican government wants to feel like that they're not going to be buying GMO corn, and that. But the problem becomes this is that they've been feeding GMO corn to their livestock for as long as we've been producing corn like that since the late 90s. And that, so I'm not sure exactly. There's not enough non-GMO corn in the world for them to completely switch over to that for the feeding of their cattle and hogs and chickens and stuff like that. And so I think that's a big factor. There's been the U.S. and has went down to try to talk to the Mexicans here to try to figure out exactly what the idea of human consumption. There's plenty of that available for making tortillas and things like that. So that's important. But that feature is really one of the factors that maybe end up increasing our carryover stock on corn, even if we do have an unchanged or slightly smaller number, because we are so far behind. So the trade is actually looking for about 25 million, I think, increase in the carryover stocks. I'm kind of unchanged to lower. Beans, the interesting thing about the soybeans exports, they're very strong, but the twist of them are right now is that we mentioned this earlier, is the fact that Brazil is off to a very decent and strong start on plantings, and that. And so the possibility of maybe a small reduction there, because I don't think that the USDA wants to see the carryover stock on beans this early in the season to be below 200 million bushels. That's really kind of the dividing line. But if you're below that, you really isn't at all good for the supplies in the U.S. If it's above 200, even if it's just slightly above, is probably the direction that's going. The trade's looking for a 10 million increase. I'm looking for a 12 million increase, whatever. In general here, the carryover stock on beans, though, is not going to all of a sudden become extremely open right now because of the smaller crop in the U.S. But this coming week's going to be interesting. We've got the U.S. elections on Tuesday, and then the USDA's November report on Wednesday. So we'll probably be pretty quiet until we get past Tuesday, and then figure out what the USDA wants to make adjustments for us on the U.S. corn and soybean crops for 2022.
All right. Thank you very much, sir.
You have a great weekend, and hopefully we don't have any other wild news coming out after we do this.